Okay, so let's take a look at this script. Let's see, we'll go line by line here. So the first line has my API key, which I don't really care to share at the moment. But aside from that, you can see everything else within the script. So the first line here is opening up the spreadsheet, which is this ID. Second line is the sheet name, which is going to be this. And this was some test data. I'm going to delete that for now. And while we're cleaning this up, actually, let's download some test data. So yeah, we'll just download these 345. It'll take a few minutes to download, so we'll let that work while we are looking over this script. So I wrote most of the script last week, and that means I don't really remember most of it, but we'll walk through pieces of it anyway, the ones that I remember. So this regular expression is checking to see if the data in the column is a LinkedIn public URL. This checks to see if it is a different type of public URL, which will not work for these purposes. And I'm assuming I use that down here later in the script to identify whether or not I have the right data and then align the columns, because some of the, or really most of the work here and making this script work is making it be able to accept any kind of spreadsheet, assuming that spreadsheet has public LinkedIn profiles that we can query the people data API for. This is just something I use to validate regular expressions. This is something I use to turn a table into a multi-dimensional array, or two-dimensional array in this case. This gets the index of an item in an array. I'm guessing I had to write this because it probably doesn't exist in ES5. This would be array from, this would be index of. Maybe there's more to it than that, but I'm sure I wrote it for a reason. Because I thought index of was ES5, but maybe not. Let's see here. Index public URL. Okay, yeah, so I use these regular expressions up there, and so I say through the array, which is this table that I've converted most likely. For each one of those, iterate through, and if this is true, why is that or false? That's weird. So I'm worried this will fail. We'll test it later on once we get that script. Why do we have that as equal to false? This makes no sense. I had a lot of over-engineered stuff in here. I wasn't thinking straight when I programmed this last week. There's a few, like this function. I'm using it now, but it was over-engineered. I basically more or less replaced it with this. I'm using it down here because it had another advantage, but all right. So anyway, we get the last row, we get the last column. I don't know. There's a lot to explain here. This will take all day, and I don't know that I really feel like explaining every little piece and every condition of why this works the way it works. But essentially, I'm checking it the first time to see do the extra headers that I'm going to insert here for the query response, do those presently exist? No, they do not. Specifically, I'm checking for this first one. So whatever you do, once you start using the script, do not change this header. Like you can change, you really shouldn't move your columns around at all once you have your data in there. Like you should be able to move it around for the most part, although I imagine you may need to make it so your LinkedIn URL is the first column, because if this is messed up, I don't feel like rewriting it right now. But anyway, just don't change your columns once you start moving forward. So it checks to see if this is true, meaning if this already exists in the table. If it doesn't, it creates it and then stops. The script stops. Then then you run it again, and it picks up and figures out where the last place it left off was, and then it adds 5 right now, but you can change that, right? So let's put something in up here, actually. We will call this number to query equals, and we'll do, I'm going to keep it at 5 for testing because these API calls are limited. But you would probably want to change this to something like 50 or 100. I wouldn't recommend going over 100. You will probably get a 429, or you'll hit the time limitation for Google Apps Script, and I'll go over that in a minute. But if you do more than 100, you're going to have a bad time. 100 at one time, I mean. So then we'll replace this 5 here and this 5 here. I don't need that anymore. Now we're creating a loop here, and I'm not going to explain the parameters of it, but it does the stuff that it needs to do. Then we make the API call, right? And so this is actually what slows down the script, because what we're doing here is we grab the whole table, which is fast, but then we're going to iterate through every item in that table and say, call this API, do the logical stuff, and then put that row in place. So add that row to the sheet. And I do it that way actually because it acts as its own rate limiter. So Google Apps Script is blocking by default, which is not normal for JavaScript, which is actually, sidebar, why I recommend people learn Google Apps Script first when they're learning JavaScript, even though it's very much an older version of JavaScript, and you'll really have to kind of relearn everything when you eventually learn ES6. But because it's blocking, it behaves in a manner in which you would think it would. So in JavaScript and native regular JavaScript on the web, if you ran this API, if you ran this fetch, well, it's actually happening here. So if you ran this fetch, it would fail because the next thing would happen before that fetch was returned. But in Google Apps Script, it's blocking, which means this next thing will not happen until this is complete, right? So it just makes it easier to reason about for people who are new in JavaScript. That being said, it's very cumbersome to write. I had to write these other functions up here that have that exist by default in ES6. Stuff like this can be written a lot cleaner easier to read, but you can get by. All right, so this is kind of ugly here, but there's several variants of phone numbers and emails that we have here. And let's check on this. Still not done. All right, well, actually, let's really check on it. Let's look in the console here and see what's going on. We're about 2/3 of the way through. All right. So I've created a bunch of these arrays. And the reason we need these is we want to look in at the API response and look at the email type. And we want 3 different categories for each one. We want personal, work, and then other. And so then we've got conditions down here that figure out, all right, is this personal or professional or neither one of those? If it's neither, throw it into the others, et cetera, et cetera. This is the actual response object here. And so we're just assigning it to a shorter variable, so it's easier to reason about down here. And we check to see if the length of emails is greater than 0, the phones is greater than 0. And then we perform this for each function, for each loop to go check it. And if so, then we push it through. Then we convert this into kind of like a pseudo array, which isn't necessary, but I prefer it that way. And then we get the birth date, the likelihood score. We push that or put that together in a 2-dimensional array. The reason we do a 2-dimensional array is because of the way that we have to insert data into Google Sheets. So when we insert data, this is your first level array. This is your second level array. So if we just tried to push in this with 1 bracket on either side instead of 2, it would fail because it doesn't know where to start, is the easiest way to say it. So basically what we're saying is, I mean, we could have a whole bunch of these. We could run these all at once and then pass them all in at once, but I'm not doing that because this is actually acting as a rate limiter for us, because when it goes to make that request, it just puts it into, it's 2 dimensions, but the first dimension is 0, so it's essentially flat. And it takes a fraction of a second, I don't know, like maybe 333 milliseconds, something like that, a third of a second, to actually put that data into the spreadsheet. And that actually serves us well, because when it's doing that, there's that much longer before we run the next query. So it takes about a second to run it the first time, then a third of a second, and waiting about a second and a half is right about the time that you normally want to wait on on your next fetch. You'll also get rate limited if you do too many requests in a period of time, which is why you don't want to do more than 100. I don't know what the real number is. I want to say I tried it up to 150 before I got rate limited. But just in general, don't exceed 100 when you're using these methods, because you also might time out. So one thing to note too is I'm on my personal account with this script, but you are limited in how many of these requests you can do in a given day. I think it's something like 20,000. It's more than that if you have a business account, but it still is limited. All right, so then we get the range, we do the math to figure out where to put it, and then we put it there, and then I log this stuff. You don't have to log it or whatever, but yeah, that's that. This script should be almost finished. We're getting there, cool. And then we'll run some tests here. So people data mapper is the function that we're going to actually run here. The rest of the functions just are other functions to make this main script work. I'm going to post this on my GitHub. Just remember to replace your API key at the top with your API key, and make sure to replace your sheet ID with your sheet ID and your sheet name with your sheet name. And finally, you want to replace the number to query with however many you want to do at any given time. First time you're running it, definitely do it at 5 because, I don't know, I haven't tested this that much. It could easily be messed up. I mean, this is freeware, so you can't be too picky. But feel free to let me know if there are any bugs, because while I probably will be using this a fair amount, I won't be using it every day. Almost there. Let's see if there's anything else we should go over. I feel like there was one other thing. Oh, I mean, you should know, I mean, you're going to be looking over this when you go into the API store here, peopledatalabs, but so it does cost money after the first 1,000 queries in a month. So just note that. They're pretty reasonably priced, though. I mean, wait, how many? Oh, the return successful matches. That's pretty reasonable. I mean, problem is they still count company emails, which I don't think you should be counting, but whatever. So let's import this that we just downloaded. All right, I'm going to grab these 40. And dump them in just as they are to make sure that this actually works. Right? So we'll run it the first time, and it should insert our rows or our extra columns. There we go. We'll run it the next time, and then it should hit the next 5, or 4 actually, I believe. Oh, 5, okay. So what's happening here is if it doesn't get any match at all, it comes back as a 404 error, and I'm just throwing the error, which, by the way, is this. So if you are doing this URL fetch app thing, this is undocumented, this mute HTTP exceptions, or maybe it's not undocumented, but it's very hard to come by. And so if you're getting a bunch of errors and you just want to ignore them and keep moving along in your script, just toss this in, put a comma, toss this in like this, and you'll be good to go. It'll basically just move along whenever it fails. The reason you'd want to do that is because you can't use like try catch in Google Apps Script. So if you have a 404 response, your whole script is going to stop. And then that happens, and let's say you were, this was your empty one. You'd try to run it, and it would keep failing and keep failing, and then you'd have to move your row up and keep doing that, and it's just not fun. All right, let's test this with a bit more data. There's my API key. Fuck. We'll do 20 at a time now. And you'll see it'll take a bit longer to run this time. There we go. And this is less than 20, but the cool thing is down here, where is it at? Here. So this stop variable, it says, basically it's saying if the table length minus the last row by call. So last row by call goes into the sheet and it gets the last column, and then it finds the place of the last data. So here 26, and then returns that number. And so if the table length minus last row by column is less than 20 in this case, then we're just going to do the table length, which in this case I think is 13. Otherwise, we do the last column plus the number to query, and that gets us to where we need to be. Let's run this again. So this should just do 13. And there we go. So there's one more step in this, but I didn't add it to this script because honestly, it's kind of, unless you're doing like tens of thousands of requests, using a timeout, which is what we ultimately need to do here if you are going to be doing thousands of requests, using not a timeout, a timer function is kind of dangerous, because until you're confident that your script is running, you don't want to be automating API calls that cost you 10 cents a pop at the baseline. And so the more I'm using this, I will be writing that, but I'm really hesitant to completely automate this at this point, given the cost associated with any failures. So that being said, there is a way to set a timer basically in here to say, let's say, it's been a while since I've made one. Oh, current project triggers. So you can add a trigger. Here, and in this case, and then time driven, and you'd say however often you want it to run. Like in this case, you'd probably want to do minutes, every 30 minutes maybe, and then click save. And then it should run. I used to do this a different way before they implemented this GUI, so I don't know. I'm assuming this will work the same way. It should. But I'll be playing around with it more as I'm feeling more comfortable with my data or with my script being functional. But for now, I don't really feel like blowing through all 1,000 of my queries. But if you want to take the risk, this is how you would do it, and click save. If you get stuck, let me know. All right. I'm going to go ahead and stop this and post the code. Yep. But that's it.